Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our workshop today on Alan's Getting Things Done time management technique to improve productivity. Right? I'm your trainer, Umar, and to begin with, let me tell you something about myself. I am a scientist, and I have been very interested in improving productivity during work. And what I've observed is that in a typical office space, when you first get started, your desk tends to get overpopulated with lots of papers because you get tasks coming in, right? And which is what some of these surveys have shown us, right? That almost 27% of office workers feel that finding the time is their biggest
Most
challenge.
of the office don't have enough space.
Absolutely, you're right.
That's why the table is like that.
Absolutely.
It's not about time management.
Well, let's
Company
see.
doesn't give enough space.
Okay, let's see why. She has a valid point, right? You don't have enough space, but what it means is you need to work with the space you have.
Umar, I like your slide.
Yeah.
Very colorful.
Yeah. That's nice. So the point is when you have these problems coming in during your workspace in terms of project meetings, assignments, your mind can get distracted, right? And you cannot manage tasks according to priority list. And your mind is generally good at tracking different things. It's not great at remembering things. For example, when you're at the supermarket, you might remember, oh, I have this task that I need to do, right? So it shows that your mind is good at thinking, but not really in storing information. So, like she said, Carol made a very good point about we are expected to do a lot more with very little that we have. That's what even David Allen was thinking about when he came up with his productivity technique, right? What this does is it uses your mind to think and not for just storing blank stuff which you can store externally in a system. So your office eventually would become something so well organized from what it was before. That is the aim.
Is the company going to give us all this cabinets?
Well, if they see the productivity that it can provide and what they can save, then of course, why not? That is what they would do. So to begin with, I would like to have a little an icebreaker where you would introduce yourself to the members within your group. You can start off on the theme of, oh, if I had more time, I would like to, right? And then think about how can you achieve what you wanted to do, right? So you can introduce yourselves amongst your group, talk to each other in a minute, and start on the theme.
More time. I want to sleep. Correct. I think I'll achieve something. Company has too much work.
We will never have enough
Maybe
time
should
for
all clear the management.
Everything. Yeah, that's true. You might never have enough. You want to do so many different things, isn't it?
Our team agreed that we want to have more time, right, for sleeping and also to tell management don't give us any more projects because it's affecting the quality of work.
It shows that you're not able to do the things that you're expected to do, right? So how do you think you can manage this? Instead of telling the management, okay, don't do this, at least with the few things that you have to do, how do you do this? Is there a way that you think you can do?
In my case, if I have more time, I would just travel, relax, don't do anything.
Yeah, but the problem was you don't have enough time. That's what you kind of mentioned, right?
Now.
How do you make the time? Is there a way you can make your time?
I retire.
Oh, you're retired.
Fully.
Okay, so that's okay. How about you? Vivian, do you have something to say about how you manage time, or how do you think you can achieve certain things?
What about you? What would, if you have more time, what would you
Yeah, exactly. So if I have more time, I like to travel and go on hikes and things like that, right? So, but for now, let's get back to our learning objectives, because what you want to do is be able to manage your time effectively, right? So our learning objectives are primarily to be able to apply Alan's getting things done technique for your time management. Right? How you do that is you will eventually be able to list the different stages and recognize the components in that process. So coming back to the topic of time management, right? Do you think there are tools that you use in your work? Because all of you are office workers, you've started work and so on, right? Do you think you have certain tools that you use? Can you think of something? Like when you design meetings or when you have tasks to complete?
I always use calendar.
There you go, very good example, calendar.
I use
You
my
know-
secretary.
Oh, you have a secretary, very convenient, you delegate it. Vivian, what do you think?
Prioritize.
You prioritize, you have a system of telling what is important and then you go along with it, great work. So what skills do you want to improve? Basically, exactly what you just mentioned. You want to be able to put your calendar in the right way, you want to be able to prioritize effectively, right? So to do that, what we want to do is the getting things done principle. What it is it can be reduced to an acronym called C for called, right? These are the 5 processes. So I want to introduce these different processes to you, and then we can go on to see how we can apply this in a regular day-to-day office environment, right? Are you guys with me? Any questions?
Yeah, I'm trying to understand, yeah, okay.
So you kind of see why, right, Carol?
Only the first C, yeah,
Yeah, so now you know why we need a system, isn't it?
trying hard, yeah, okay.
There you go, perfect. Okay, so the first step is to collect everything. Because like Carol mentioned, we have too many things flying around, right? What we need to do is to be able to collect the things we need to do, isn't it? So we first collect everything you want to do, that you have to do, that you sometimes aspire to do. So it goes into a first step, which is collection. The next step is where you clarify, right? Where you ask, what's the next thing we have to do with it? And then you have to organize it in terms of dates, like you mentioned, a calendar, or you have to put it into a context. And I will expand on these statements later. Eventually you have to review and see, oh, what do I have to do today on a daily basis? And think about your entire bigger goals on a weekly basis. And finally, after you've done the review for the day, you go and actually do the tasks. But when you do them, you have to prioritize them. Isn't it, Vivian? You had the most important point. So the first stage, what are we collecting? How are we?
Sorry, Omar, can you go back to the previous slide?
Yeah, sure.
Just a simple question on the last one, right?
Hmm.
Do your task based on context, time, and priority.
Yeah.
Which come first?
There you go. So, but you understand what a context is as of now?
Yeah.
Do you know what a context is? Can someone suggest what it could mean?
Are you at work or at home?
Precisely, perfect. So the context tells you where can I do this task, right? Like with the shopping example that I gave you. I'm at the shopping mall now, right? I can do my groceries, I can't do my office tasks. So the context tells you the environment, for one. The others are clear, isn't it? Time, and how do you prioritize? These are things that we would eventually understand. But for now, it's important to know that there is a process that we have to follow. The individual components we will also learn throughout the next workshop sessions and so on. The first process, going back to what I mentioned, is collection. So you collect all the tangible items such as papers, bills, email, not emails, physical letters, into a physical box. And you collect all your ideas, thoughts separately, like in a notepad or things like that, right? So this is where you have collected everything. And what that does is, it helps you free up your mind. So now you don't need to stress your mind with these things that are already collected in your head. Now you know that there's an external system where you've stored all the things that have all of that on your list.
But the
right?
box will be so big,
Hmm.
because you collect a lot of rubbish, you know?
Precisely, yeah, that is important because you seem to be getting a lot of work coming in, isn't it? Like you mentioned before.
Everybody is my boss.
It's a tough place to be, but that's exactly why she needs the getting things done principle, right? So now she has a box to collect her things, and you have your notepad to collect your emails and things like that. What you do next is you clarify it. What does clarify mean? Is to think about it. So you need to think, is this item actionable, right? Can I act on it, or is it just something I can store? If it's something you can store, like Carol mentioned, it could just be garbage. It could be your flyers, your advertisements that you just have to discard into trash, right? But if it's actionable, it means you have to act on it, isn't it? Like a memo, a task, a duty to set up a meeting, right? Are you guys with me?
Can I say no? Because
okay.
certain
Of
things,
course.
you know, I don't feel like doing it, you know, even though somebody wants me to do it. Because I don't see it's important.
Precisely. Okay, let's ask Vivian there. Vivian, she says there are things that people dump on her and she doesn't want to do it. What does it tell you about those tasks that are put on her? Are they very important for her job scope?
Maybe not.
Maybe not, right? So see, you need to recognize your job
What
scope.
if I get fired, for not doing it?
Exactly. So there the problem lies in your job scope. You need to be able to define your responsibilities. That is what you need to do first, right? You need to be able to know what is my priority in my work area. That helps you choose what to do. But anyway,
what
going
if
back.
it's not actionable?
Exactly.
So where do we put that?
I will get back to that. If it's not actionable, like I gave you an example, flyers and advertisements, you throw them, right? And now, if it's actionable, you need to decide, is it the multiple steps that are required to finish that? Like a big project, right, where you need to approach differently. Or is it something that, like a one-step task that you need to do? Like, oh, I need to send out this email to this person to get this thing delivered. That is just one activity, right? So you need to decide, oh, is it a one-step or a two-step process? After you do that, you put all these tasks into lists, right? Like for example, if you have actionable items that are based on time, you would put them into a calendar, like you mentioned, isn't it? Right? Charlene, do you have any idea what, or do you use any of these lists here?
To-do list.
There you go. So the to-do list is your next action list. It tells you that there is one action I need to do, right?
But the to-do list is so long.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
The to-do.
Does anyone else have a
To do
suggestion?
list, right?
Yeah, to-do list.
I know, this to-do list can just keep on expanding, right? At the end of the day, you have
Right.
so many things.
Yeah.
So you
Right.
have
Can
a
someone help her fix
today
this?
to-do list, this week to-do list, and this month to-do list.
Then you create a next month.
Correct.
Okay, there you go. There's one suggestion. Maybe Charlene can think of, Carol can maybe think about that, right? Gordon, do you have
no
something to
solution
add?
for this. I need to find someone to help me on that.
Yeah. Hopefully, I hope, having a discussion here and trying to see how the getting things done system works, will be able to help each one of us, right,
Yes.
to be able to put things into perspective. Okay, so anyway, coming back to the organization aspect, we organize them into different categories, like I was mentioning. Where if we have an event, we put it into a calendar. If we have a single task, like, oh, my wife asked me to get this grocery from the supermarket, fair price for dinner. That goes into my to-do list because it's just one item, one list of items.
Within your control.
Yes, within your control, that's important. And you have a waiting for list. Do you know what a waiting for list could be?
KIV, is it?
Sorry?
Sorry.
Waiting for some thing
Yeah,
to happen.
absolutely.
that
So
you can
Keep
do.
in view, is it?
Waiting for something to happen, like Paul mentioned. So this is where, when you have, when something is actionable, but not by you, by somebody else, right? So that's where you delegate the work. That's where you have to wait for someone else to get back to you. And projects are multiple step processes, right? Where you need to create a different folder for your projects, define the different steps involved, then and the first most important step goes into your to-do list because you need to get your projects going. But you need to break them down to be able to do them perfectly. And then everything else that cannot be worked on either is trashed or put into a reference material folder, right? And finally, you need to review all these different lists because you need to see, oh, today is, say, for example, the 23rd of September. Do I need to do something today? And things like that. Finally, you do it. And when you do it, right, like Dawn mentioned, you need to have a context. You need to have a time, right, for doing certain things. And like Vivian mentioned, you have to have a priority. You can't just keep on going through the list haphazardly, right? You need to be able to plan them. And so to recap, let me tell you that this is a 5-step process, right? And the acronym would be C for called, where the first step is to collect your physical and your intangible items into a certain container called the inbox. Then you clarify them by asking the question, what's the next action? And then you organize them into different lists. You review your different lists on a daily and some lists on a weekly basis. Then you actually do it in terms of the different categories like context, time, and priority. And then you can relax because now you don't need to remember all these things. You have them all set out in different lists, in your calendar and things like that, right? So you So now you've got them all filled. And therefore, these are the 5 processes, and you can kind of picturize this process in an image here, where you empty everything in your head, right? All these little tasks that you need to do, put them into an inbox. For the physical stuff, for the non-physical stuff. Then you ask the question where you're clarifying, is it actionable? If it's not actionable, do I trash it? Am I someday going to get to it? Am I going to record it for future use? And if it's actionable, if it's a very quick process, like just one email.
But I
can
want to
do
ask
it.
something, Omar. I mean,
Actually, let me just sum up and then I'll get back to the questions.
Okay.
So then you can have a multi-step or a single-step process, right? A multi-step are your projects, which have to be broken down into single steps eventually. And the single steps have to be, you need to decide, are you going to do it or are you going to do it at a later time? If someone else is going to do it, you delegate it and you put that term in the waiting for list. And if you're going to do it, you're going to put it on your own to-do list or you're going to put it in your calendar, right? That's the gist of the system. All right, Kenneth, sorry for holding you there. Is there something
you know why
have to ask?
this diagram looks good, but
Mhm.
there is one problem I have with this is like,
Yeah.
even before you get to the actionable and not actionable,
Yeah.
I think what is important is whether the things inside the box is important or not important. And I think that part is a challenge for some of us, you
Okay.
know. Yeah, because you don't want to spending time to action something that is actually not important.
So I think what Carol mentions here could be potentially a limitation of this method, because this method kind of emphasizes that you need to first collect everything before you think about it, right? So maybe it is a limitation here, Carol, which means you need a prioritization step before putting it into the box, right?
But I think it's fine, because
You think it's okay?
you can say that we can prioritize, right?
Yeah.
So they mean we set certain ranking,
Perfect.
importance.
So you kind of
Based on
subdivide
that,
your list,
we-
you mean?
We can go
Yeah,
through
you want
the
to
process.
subdivide these save for later files in terms of
Yeah.
priority. Very good idea. I like that. So
I like your flowchart,
you do.
beautiful.
Thank you. It's very colorful as well, right?
Yeah.
It's better than some things that I've passed on in your handouts, which I have to accept are very complicated. So let's practice our skills. So the aim is to study the scenario I've handed out to you, right? And then try and break it down into the different bits. I think you can spend a minute to kind of read it, and then about 3 minutes to help populate the charts on the wall. They're just behind you. And the general instructions are, yeah, you have to go through the flowchart of the getting things done system, and you would be able to organize the different tasks into the categories. Right? And then once you do that, we can have a discussion as to why you put certain things into certain charts. Right? So whenever you're ready, after reading it, you can move on to the charts.
Do we do it on the?
Yeah, you can use the one for the group B, here on the right side. So there's an example here on the wall of what kind of list you have. So I think at least one item in each category is what I'm looking for.
Do we need to enter the calendar?
Sure, if you think it is necessary, right, Paul?
Yeah.
Yeah, correct.
You guys could use the calendar too in case you want to put something on a certain day.
Okay, today, what is today's date?
Today is, I think, the 2nd of October.
Second of October.
You can pull the calendar down.
After 5.
If you have any questions, you can always feel free to ask me.
So it's like, you know, one through
Are we on the right track?
Yeah, I totally agree with you, except how do you, why do you find
It's a reference for the sales report.
Is that the subject?
Specification.
We just get from technical. There are mails asking for technical
On what
specification.
regards? Are they working on some project or is it just a question that they're involved in?
Just a question.
No, but I think it involves that, it involves that, no, Omar? It involves that, because you know that you need to
Under
define.
what project do you think it comes?
This workstation.
There you go, so that could be a project.
So workstation is a project.
Because you are the sales team leader, right, and you have different projects.
Goes back.
So now you can define things under
Then it's your technical specs, right? So actually a technical spec.
We'll get from technical.
Maybe go get a reference number.
We need to put it down there as well.
So that we get from there.
Absolutely.
We got it, technical specs for workstation project.
But the big one is the reference. A lot of documents on the table.
Oh, sorry.
But then you want to look at the two
No, it's just he has a lot of documents.
So once you think you've done with filling up the list, you can call out to me and then we can have a discussion on it. Okay, I think it's about time now. Let's turn around and have a quick look at each other's charts. And to begin with, I think there seems to be a difference here, right?
No, the
Like,
calendar is same.
calendar is absolutely the same. So you
Ah.
managed to put things that are itemized on a certain date into the calendar, right? And incidentally, your next action lists are quite different, right? For example,
Same.
It's just say,
you have the same items, different order.
Yeah, equally
Vivian,
smart.
do you think
Order
the order,
different,
which one
but
would you
then
think is
items are
better,
same.
Vivian, in terms of the order? Okay, so for example,
handwriting is better.
when you finish work at 5 p.m., right? Would you then think about groceries or the bills?
The grocery first,
But the bills are related to your work, isn't it?
Yeah.
So would you rather put the bills up front like they have,
Yeah.
right? Because it's part of your work, isn't it?
Because actually our concern was that the sales report, we do not know how long it will take. And then by
Ah,
5
right.
PM, we
Yes.
need to deliver.
So that's why you decided to
Yeah.
take home your work.
No,
Delay.
because there was
Delay.
no,
Okay.
there was no
Look
indication.
whether the 6 bills related to the sales.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
okay,
think
because it's
it
clear,
was
it's
clear,
clear.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Or like
And there's
Kwa
no
mentioned,
timeline,
you could always
even-
shift it to another day if it's not
Yeah,
essential.
postpone it.
Yeah.
Which means you're using a prioritization step.
Correct,
Right.
they're prioritizing.
Right? And also you have a stage where you filled up the waiting for list, right? Why have you put it in the waiting for column?
So the workstation project, there was a request for technical specs, so obviously we need to get that from the technical
Yeah, that's good.
department.
We missed that out.
So we need to ask the technical department and wait for it.
Yeah, so now you have a list where you know that you need to keep
Yeah.
track of, but does that come under a project for you guys as well?
Yeah.
Is that part of a project?
Yes.
It's
Yes,
part of your
yes,
workstation.
yeah, yeah.
So now you have a project list that tells you the main outcome of the project, which is the workstation aspect. Then you divide it into subcategories, right? But have you identified all the categories under the workstation project?
We identify what is outstanding, and the only thing that's outstanding is a technical spec that we need to feedback
From
with
them, right?
the request.
Well, perhaps we can look at what the suggested solution would be. Right? So you have your calendar, and I see that all of you have put in precisely what is expected to go into the calendar. Great job there, right? And you have your next action list where you've put in the right item, so you know what you needed to get done that day, right? I mean, isn't that what you did? But you have put the sales report in as well, so you have the items in there. Have a seat, Gordon.
Can I ask one question? The latest sales magazine, what does it reference for?
Okay,
his
so
work?
because you're a sales manager, what do you think you need in this scenario? You might need the latest sales magazine, right, to give you tips and
Ideas.
Ideas, yeah. So that's why you put it into your reference, isn't it?
Actually, we got all the answers correct.
Pretty much, isn't it?
pretty much.
So do we get a
Yeah.
prize or?
Yes, you will at the end of this. So then, I just wanna. So basically, what you did was you collected, you thought about the actions, you organized it, and then you did it, right? So now we're gonna have a quick assessment of all these steps, and I would like you to just fill up your answers. The names are optional. It's a very quick, short assessment. And once you're done completing the answers, you can pass the sheet to the next group for them to help you evaluate. Yeah, so if you're done, you can exchange it between the groups. Are you done? Someone done here? Okay, you can pass me your sheet. And you can take that from Gordon. You can give a comment on this. Are you done? You're done. Thank you, Carol. You done? Alright. Let's wait for Don to finish. Okay, good job, Don. So, yeah.
Come on, Don.
You can have a look at this and write your comments if you have any. And then you can tell us what you think based on your looking at someone's sheet. What do you think is happening? Do you think they've got it correct? Do you think there is a process that they've missed out?
There's one, I don't agree, I don't know whose this one is.
Okay, what does
Number
it say?
2, this person picked no.
Ah,
So should it be yes or no, Omar?
Which
yes.
one?
Should it be yes or no?
For which question?
For
The
question
to-do
2.
list can contain tasks that require multiple actions.
Who can answer this?
It's a yes, right? Yeah, to me it's a yes.
That requires multiple actions over many days? I thought, is your to-do list decided for that day or is it for?
One action that
Is
is
there a
within
place where you
control.
can put things that need multiple steps? Is there a place where you put them?
People step is a project.
There you go, good answer, Doc. So you have a project list for putting things where you need to do multiple, isn't it?
So the answer is
No.
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 Yeah.
You cannot
Precisely.
today do grocery, tomorrow grocery.
Exactly, you're right, yeah.
You do one
Yeah,
thing.
there you go. Well, is that clear? Yeah.
To-do list can contain tasks that require multiple actions.
So multiple actions is a project list.
Exactly, there you go, got it right too, right? So that's how you do it. And these are of course your answers. So I would
Then the
evaluate,
question is not
well phrased,
phrased,
is it?
yeah, correct.
Perhaps. So that's what we did. We looked at the processes, the C for cord, then we processed them, like what you wanted to do. And finally, what I want you to do is to be able to transfer this to your workplace, right? What it involves is that in 2 weeks' time, you go through whatever you've learned here, apply it to your workplace, and kind of give a brief summary of what you did to your supervisor, right? And with that, I hope you guys have learned the getting things done time management technique, all right? Is that good?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I think
I have one more question.
Yes.
This flow chart is, are we supposed to follow?
Well, that's a good question. You don't need to strictly follow the flowchart, but you can adapt it to what you would like to do or what your work entails. All right? If you have any further questions, you can always look up on the Getting Things Done technique. I would recommend you to read David Allen's book as well, which is a good starting point.
Where can I get?
Of course, at any library or I think Amazon might sell one as well. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you.